to the Printed Prop Shop. I'm Michael. So today we have another Mystery Makers design. It is Obi Wan Kenobi's meat cutter. And yes, it's a meat cutter. He's cutting meat with it. So this is another fabulous design coming out of Mystery Makers. Once again, I can't say enough about his designs. They're pretty pristine. They have excellent artwork, instructions to go and put them together. I just couldn't say enough about Mystery Makers and Marco himself. So, without further ado, here's how I did it. I wanted to display some of the artwork that Marco provides as well with his files. You can really tell that he puts in the work for not only the details on the files, but the artwork as well. He provides detailed instructions, and this particular file actually came with a molded handle with leather, or a regular standard handle that you could wrap your own leather. I chose to do the molded one because I'm not really too detailed on leather yet. And they can be found at patreon.com/mysterymakers. Check them out. So jumping right into the actual file printing itself, I did have to go and slice up the blade and cut it in half. Always make sure that you select both parts if you're keeping both parts when you cut it. My resin printer is just a little bit smaller, so I did have to cut it in half, but it molded together just fine. Now I did have to add some supports to the bottom of the handle just for that little hole. And the upper knife part, that piece right there in the middle, that piece actually failed on me. It was just a matter of it didn't stick to the build plate apparently. Now I will say, if you're printing this out in resin, I should have scaled that upper knife piece up about 2%, and it would have saved me a lot of sanding. It would have fit in a little bit better. It wasn't the design problem, it was just the fact of printing it off in resin. That's what happens sometimes. And the handle 3, I didn't actually need to print that off. If you're doing the molded handle, you don't need that handle 3. That goes with the handle that you would print off to put your own leather on it. And once again, here's just some files printing for you. If you like this sort of thing, it came out kind of glitchy as it normally does in time-lapse, but there you go. Now after I took care of some sanding, and it was fairly light sanding, I used actual construction adhesive this time as opposed to super glue. I've been using construction adhesive here lately just because it was what I had on hand, and it holds just the same for me anyway. And to sand off any overspill came off just fine. I didn't have any issues. Now I will say, when I cut this in half, it cut properly, but apparently it didn't print off that well as far as my build plate. And you can tell on the blade there I had a little bit of a gap, but I just used that regular tube wood filler that I like, and it came out perfectly fine. As you can see in the finished model, it was just fine. And here, you know, I went heavy on my supports after I reprinted this piece on its side, as opposed to printing it vertically. I printed it horizontally, and I did have a little bit more sanding to do. Again, if you're printing this off in resin, I would say scale up that piece by about 2%. It would probably fit on just fine, and you'd have a lot less sanding. But as for me, I had already printed it out, so I just went ahead and sanded it. You know, resin sands fairly easy. So now it was on to painting. I started with the top piece in the silver. I did several light coats. I didn't do a black coat first. And the reason for that was I wanted this to be more of a silver than I did the blade. The blade, you'll see I do a black coat to start. And I did end up doing the silver first and then went into the brown, or leather actually. It's actually called leather. And in this paint kit, it came out fairly well. I did several light coats, and then I did one final heavy coat. And I was really cautious to spray up to that silver piece that I just painted. And it came out fairly well. I didn't really have much of an overspray at all. Nothing that I don't think anyone would see if you were using this as an actual prop, or, you know, for pictures or anything like that. Granted, if you went and really got up on it, you may find yourself some overspray, but I really wasn't too concerned about it. I then went into the blade, and you'll notice I started with this base coat of black. Again, I did use that Wicked Black that I like using. Now, as you can tell, I'm not going over it in a complete coat. I'm just going over kind of different areas. And what I'm wanting to achieve with this is when I throw down my silver coat, I want that black to bleed through, but I don't want it to bleed through everything. I kind of want it to have more of kind of a Damascus look, if that makes any sense. Not a complete Damascus, but more of a used look. And if you can tell, I had already primered it, and I didn't really go crazy on my sanding. I love imperfections on things like this. I think it makes it stand out so much more as being looking like it's actually being used before. And believe me, when you're weathering this, those imperfections actually help you more than trying to make your own imperfections. It's really tiresome to go back and try to make your own imperfections, in my opinion anyway. With this, you can have those scrape lines. You can have any kind of lines. Like you can tell I've got a straight vertical line, and that maybe he was cutting through a bone or something like that that dug into the metal. That's kind of my backstory with it, you know. That's what I'm going with. And when I'm putting on this silver coat, you can see that those black spots that I went really heavy with on are actually bleeding through, and it's kind of giving more of a textured or waved look, and looks more of being used as opposed to just being a straight piece of metal. And that's exactly what I was going for. And then I moved on to the pommel, and the pommel I wanted silver, just like the top of that handle. I wanted it to stand out more than the blade, because if that's the case, you're using the blade, the pommel's not being used so much as any kind of weapon, so it's going to keep a little bit a shinier texture. And when I go back over it and weather it, it's going to have still some of that silver with some of the sand that I'm going to mix in, the soot I'm going to mix in, and the dirt and things like that. And it's going to pop more than what that used blade would look like, to me anyway. And when I did this pommel, I actually did a light coat on each side. I flipped it over, and then it did another heavier coat to finish it off. And that was really just all it really took. It didn't take a whole lot. And now is to assemble the whole unit. Again, I used my construction adhesive. The construction adhesive holds really well. The only drawback of using a construction adhesive is your actual time that it takes to dry. And if you notice, I did have a little bulge out of the side. Honestly, that little bulge, when I look at it, I'm able to cover it up with my weathering. I'm not really too concerned about it. If someone was to nitpick, yeah, they could probably go in there and say, I see your glue coming through. But I really don't think anyone's going to nitpick like that. And I really wasn't too worried about it. Again, the drawback is that it takes a little while to dry. So you do have to find some place to vertically stand this. And what I did is I just took 2 boxes and put them together and kind of mushed it in between and held it like that overnight, and the next morning it held just fine. So to me, this is the fun part. You get to go and just dirty it up. What is it going to hurt? It's not going to hurt anything. If anything, you're going to overdo it, which if you do overdo it, you can always just wipe it down. That's the great thing about acrylics here. You're just really watering it down, and if you get it over too heavy, just go and wipe it off. Now with this, I was trying to go and get it into the grooves really well, because especially you can see that horizontal line on there. I really wanted to expose that just for what it was. I'm going with a story that he was cutting through a bone, and he sliced into it, and it scarred up the blade. That's my story with it. I love it. And when you're doing this, of course, if you've got really fine detail lines that you're trying to keep, you're just going to have to let that paint sit on there just a little bit longer so it has a little bit of time to dry rather than wiping it off. But now the handle really came out well. I really love how the black fell into all those grooves with the detail, and just really filled in those voids that it was kind of missing. And then I pulled out my Tamiya weathering kits that my lovely wife got for me this past Christmas. And I started off with the soot. Now, what I like to do with these is I like to start with my darker colors first and then build on top of those. As far as I know, that is the correct way to kind of do your colors. Start with a darker and then go lighter as you come out. And as far as me, I just wanted to get it into all those grooves, and what I like to do is really get my hands dirty with these. You can see I'll pull out my finger and just start rubbing it in. It gives even a better weathering look to me as far as just being random. And of course there are some areas that you have typical weathering, so if the blade's constantly going down, most of your weathering is going to be kind of shooting up, in my opinion. And then I went into like kind of a rust color because I did want it to have a little bit of rust to it, even though it's well taken care of. Naturally, just the liquids coming through the meat is most likely going to rust it at some point, or just carrying it around, you're probably going to get rust somewhere and somehow. Not only that, it lightens up a lot of that soot that I just put on it, and you can just kind of go over it. As far as rust goes, that's what I went with that vertical line. Maybe it was just starting to rust a little bit. And then I went into my sand. We're on a sand planet. Naturally, this meat cutter is going to have some sand mixed in with it, and so is the blade. If you've ever been to a beach or lived in a sandy area, sand gets everywhere, so it's going to be everywhere. That's what I'm going with. So again, too, have fun with your weathering. Just go with it, and it's your story. Tell it. So that's how I did it, guys. Fully out of resin, some paint, airbrush, some weathering kits. You could literally just go and weather this with regular wash down paint if you wanted to. It wouldn't take a whole lot. I like using those weathering kits though. The handle is just wonderful. Like I did say, I should have scaled this up a little bit to make it fit. It would have saved me some time, but that's just resin. Resin sands fairly easy, and you don't usually have any issues with it. Just with resin, if you were printing this out of resin, I would scale up the middle piece just a tad, maybe 2%, just so it'd slide right in. But other than that, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Hope you're keeping up on Obi Wan Kenobi, the show. It releases every Wednesday. I'm not giving paid advertisement for it. I'm just really happy with the show. I'm really enjoying it. So check it out. Hit it every week and just have a good time. Thank you for watching. Hope you have a great day, and we'll see you next time. See you now. Go build something.